Try not to gasp when you see these Good Times 1974 actors then versus now. What if everything you thought you knew about Good Times was only half the story? Behind the laughter and that unforgettable dynamite, the real lives of this cast took turns no audience ever saw. One little girl on this show grew up to sell over 100 million records and become a global icon. One proud father walked away from the role that made him famous and was killed off the show overnight. And several of these beloved faces are no longer with us. Stay until the end, because some of these stories will surprise you more than you expect. And if you love powerful untold stories like this one, subscribe to Hidden Celebrity Stories and drop a comment. Tell us where you're watching from. Janet Jackson, Penny Gordon Woods. The world knows her now as a titan, an artist who has moved past 100 million records and reshaped popular music itself. But rewind to 1977, and she was an 11-year-old stepping into one of the most demanding roles a child could be handed. As Penny Gordon Woods in the closing seasons of Good Times, Janet Jackson played a girl scarred by abuse and abandonment, and the youngest of the storied Jackson family, born in 1966, met that challenge with a depth that left viewers shaken. Her gift wasn't slickness, it was unguarded sincerity. She made Penny's terror and her flickering hope feel utterly real, allowing the series to speak about cruelty that 1970s television usually buried. For a child still years from finding her own identity, it was a staggering debut. Her identity announced itself in 1986. Control tore her free of the family name and made her an artist in her own right, and Rhythm Nation 1814 paired infectious sound with genuine purpose. From there, she ascended into rare air, redefining what a performer could achieve through dance, spectacle, and fearless reinvention, influencing nearly everyone who followed. These days, in her late 50s, she still fills arenas and still draws fresh listeners into her catalog. Yet for anyone who watched her as a child, Penny endures as the seed of it all. The trembling girl in a Chicago apartment became a woman who shaped global culture. A quiet testament to how the most fragile beginnings can carry the makings of a legend, and how far a single early role can echo across an entire lifetime. John Amos, James Evans. To countless households in the 1970s, he embodied the father figure who shouldered the world without ever asking for thanks. James Evans radiated strength and sacrifice, and the actor who gave him life had earned that gravity through a remarkable path. Born in 1939, John Amos had worn the uniform of the military, counseled others as a social worker, and competed as a professional football player before acting claimed him. And that lived experience poured into everything he did. Early recognition came through The Mary Tyler Moore Show, but 1974 transformed his career when he stepped into James Evans, a father grinding to support his family inside the Chicago projects. Amos lent the part a dignity that flatly refused caricature, and audiences responded so deeply that the role brought him Golden Globe nominations across both 1975 and 1976. His principles, though, outweighed his ambition. Disturbed by the program's tilt toward exaggerated comedy, and convinced black families deserved honest depiction, he chose to walk away in 1976. His character's off-screen death jolted the nation. Still, he only grew. In 1977, his commanding turn as the older Kunta Kinte in Roots earned an Emmy nomination, and he later charmed audiences in Coming to America and brought grit to Die Hard 2. Throughout his life, he fought for honest representation and treasured fatherhood above all. John Amos died in 2024 at 84. He was never content merely to perform. He carried meaning into every frame, and for a generation that grew up watching him, James Evans will forever stand for resilience, pride, and a fierce, steadfast love. Esther Roll, Florida Evans. Where her on-screen husband supplied the steel, Esther Roll supplied the soul. Her Florida Evans transcended the role of television mother to become an emblem of faith and dignity, weathering every blow life delivered. And the artist beneath the apron had spent a lifetime preparing for it. Born in 1920 in Florida to Bahamian immigrants, she came up through the theater alongside the Negro Ensemble Company, committed from her earliest days to portraying Black life with truth and grace. Her Florida first appeared on the sitcom Maude in 1972, and the response was so electric that Good Times was built around her 2 years later. From its 1974 premiere, she served as the show's moral compass, a mother carrying grief and want with quiet conviction that drew a Golden Globe nomination in 1975. And, far more, the devotion of viewers who recognized their own lives in hers. She, too, demanded better. She challenged the elements she believed cheapened the show's message, even leaving for a stretch and returning only once promised its heart would be restored. Her reach extended well past that Chicago apartment into films like Driving Miss Daisy and Rosewood, and to an Emmy win in 1979 for Summer of My German Soldier. She kept her private life modest, prizing impact over acclaim. Esther Roll died in 1998 at 78, from complications of diabetes. She did more than inhabit Florida Evans. She rewrote how the world saw Black womanhood, leaving behind a lesson that has never lost its power. That genuine strength flows not from riches, but from integrity and the will to endure. Jimmy Walker, J.J. Evans. One syllable shaped the comedy of an entire era, and anyone who lived it can still hear the way he hollered it. Dynamite! The word jumped off the screen and lodged itself in the nation's vocabulary among the defining sounds of the 1970s. The man who turned J.J. Evans into the show's comic engine had arrived by a road few would have predicted. Born in 1947 in the Bronx, Jimmy Walker never set out to act. He honed himself in radio and stand-up, developing the razor timing that let him cut through New York's unforgiving comedy circuit. That discipline paid off when he won the part of JJ in 1974 at just 26, and the character ignited almost overnight, bringing Walker Golden Globe nominations in 1975 and 1976. That blaze of popularity, however, came tangled with conflict. Viewers delighted in JJ's exuberance, but critics charged that the role tilted too far into caricature, and offstage that very debate strained relationships among castmates determined to defend the show's deeper mission. Even so, Walker stayed at its center through the later seasons. Once the series wrapped in 1979, he came home to stand up. And where so many television stars crumble after a hit, he constructed a career spanning decades, touring relentlessly while surfacing in films like Airplane. He never wed, stating frankly that he prized his freedom and his work above all. Now, in his late 70s, Jimmy Walker is still working the stage, a breathing connection to a moment when one burst of comedy could reverberate across a generation and never quite fade away. Jeanette Dubois, Willona Woods. Every close-knit family has the friend who brightens every room, and for the Evanses, that radiant force was Willona Woods. Jeanette Dubois played her with such effervescence that the next-door neighbor felt like blood, quick-witted, self-reliant, and unfailingly present when trouble struck. When Willona took the abused Penny under her wing, she handed the show some of its most stirring moments of compassion and rescue. Dubois carried a deep theatrical pedigree into the part, having graced Broadway in works like Golden Boy beside Sammy Davis Jr., and broken ground as one of the first African-American actresses to hold a regular role on a daytime serial. By her 1974 arrival on Good Times, audiences embraced her immediately. Yet acting was only one of her gifts. You have likely heard her voice more often than you know. She co-wrote and performed Moving on up, the jubilant theme of the Jeffersons, recorded with a full gospel choir and instantly familiar to this day. She went on to claim 2 Emmy Awards for her voice work on the PJs, and in 1992 she founded the Pan-African Film Festival, which still champions Black cinema. She weathered both happiness and private grief, but poured herself into her work and her community until her final days. Jeanette Dubois passed away in February 2020 at the age of 74. Her precise birth year a secret she always kept. Her legacy, however, holds no mystery at all. Through Walona, through that immortal theme song, and through the doors she pried open for others, she lifted a whole generation with boundless, contagious joy. Bernadette Stanis, Thelma Evans. Within that crowded apartment of vivid characters, Thelma Evans offered viewers something television had seldom dared to show. A young Black woman whose worth lay in her intellect, poise, and quiet certainty. Through Bernadette Stanis, Thelma grew beyond the role of daughter into one of the earliest portraits of a young woman reaching for independence and dignity on American screens. Born in 1953 in Brooklyn, Stanis was devoted to the arts from girlhood and trained seriously as an actress before her breakthrough, carrying real technique into the role that defined her. When good times arrived in 1974, she became Thelma, a teenager finding herself amid the Chicago projects, clever, graceful, and resolved to build a brighter life. With representation so scarce in that era, her every scene carried meaning, and as the series unfolded, Thelma chased her education, defied what was expected of her, and married in the final season, her path mirroring the aspirations of young women all across the country. When the show closed in 1979, Stanis declined to cling to fame. She turned to authorship, publishing several books on relationships and self-growth shaped by her own experiences, and she raised her family while remaining rooted in the community that formed her. Now in her 70s, she's honored as a cultural touchstone, frequently reuniting with the admirers who still treasure Thelma. Her portrayal lives on as a beacon for a generation of young women bold enough to imagine more than their surroundings allowed. She didn't simply act a character. She stretched the boundaries of what felt achievable, and that inheritance still moves people today. Moses Gunn, Carl Dixon. In a series so steeped in hardship, Carl Dixon entered with a wholly different aura. Serene, sage, and softly commanding. Embodied by the eminent Moses Gunn, Carl was no afterthought of a side character. He stood for steadiness and a fresh chapter in Florida Evans' life after she had borne devastating loss. Born in 1929 in Street, Louis, Gunn was a true trailblazer of Black theater. In 1967, he helped establish the Negro Ensemble Company, an institution that flung open doors for African American artists for decades thereafter. His stage achievements earned Obie Awards and nominations for both a Tony and an Emmy, marking him as a profoundly respected craftsman long before good times ever called. Joining in the mid-1970s, Carl arrived as a shopkeeper who became Florida's companion and, in time, her husband. The writers cast him as James Evans' opposite. Where James had blazed with intensity, Carl was contemplative and tranquil, carrying gentle, probing conversation into the household. It was a daring move, demonstrating to audiences that life, and even love, could flower anew after grief. What kept Carl lodged in memory wasn't theatrics but a hushed authority. Gunn delivered each line with a steady calm that held your attention, granting the family and the viewer a sense of recovery. Away from the show, he excelled in films such as Shaft and Ragtime, his performances forever threaded with intelligence. Moses Gunn died in 1993 at the age of 64 from complications of asthma. However short his run on the series, Carl Dixon left behind a quiet consolation. That renewal can follow even the most crushing sorrow, often in the form of steady companionship. Johnny Brown, Nathan Bookman. Every memorable series needs someone who can spin an ordinary scene into pure gold. and on Good Times, that alchemist was Nathan Bookman. Affectionately remembered by fans as Bookman the superintendent, he could easily have been a forgettable bit player. But through Johnny Brown, he became one of the show's most treasured presences. Born in 1937 in Street, Petersburg, Florida, Brown was a seasoned showman well before the sitcom discovered him. He'd forged his name in music and comedy across nightclubs and variety stages, and his effortless charm carried him to television, including Laugh-In, where his range was plain to see. By the time Bookman came along, he was more than ready to make the part shine. As the building's superintendent, he perpetually butted heads with the Evans family over rent and the building's woeful state. But Brown declined to reduce him to a mere antagonist. He invested Bookman with warmth and comedy, his rubber-faced expressions, singular voice, and impeccable delivery transforming throwaway moments into big laughs. Fans adored him, not in spite of his flaws, but because of them. A man wedged between authority and tenderness, capturing the daily friction of the neighborhood. Beyond the sitcom, Brown enjoyed a long, varied run across film, television, and theater, now and then revealing the singing voice that first opened doors. A devoted husband to his wife June for many years, he stayed close to fans deep into his later life, appearing at events that celebrated the classics. Johnny Brown died in 2022 at the age of 84. His legacy endures in laughter, proof that the right talent can render even a modest role unforgettable. Ralph Carter, Michael Evans. Among the larger-than-life personalities, Michael Evans set himself apart in a more reflective, incisive way. Perceptive, vocal, and attuned to the world far beyond his age. He carried the voice of a rising generation, and the youngster who played him held a talent that stretched well past television. Born in 1961 in New York City, Ralph Carter gave his heart first to the stage rather than the screen. By 9, he was already on stage, and in 1973, his work in the Broadway musical Raisin drew a Tony nomination and a Drama Desk Award, a breathtaking accomplishment for a child. Arriving on Good Times in 1974 as Michael, he carried that same richness into the role. Set apart from the broader comic figures, Michael was written as keen and politically conscious, regularly confronting racism and injustice outright, and emerging as the family's conscience during a decade of awakening. He even ventured into music mid-run, releasing a 1976 album titled Young and in Love. When the series ended, he made a decision that distinguished him from so many former child performers. Rather than pursue Hollywood, he went back to the theater that had first won his heart, later working to safeguard African American theater through cultural efforts. He guarded his private life closely, favoring family and community over the relentless glare of celebrity. Now in his 60s, Ralph Carter represents something uncommon. A performer who tasted vast success as a child and still chose meaning over fame. His Michael Evans was more than memorable. He gave voice to convictions that remain just as pressing now, showing that even a sitcom can hold ideas built to outlast it. Chip Fields, Lenore Gordon. Some figures grace only a handful of episodes yet linger in memory for a lifetime, and Lenore Gordon was unmistakably one. Realized by Chip Fields, Lenore entered as the troubled mother of young Penny, a thread that drew Good Times into shadows it had never before explored, becoming one of the most emotionally charged arcs in the show's whole run. Born in New York, Chip Fields launched her career not solely as an actress but as a singer, performing in a musical group and recording before acting drew her in. That acute feel for emotion suited her perfectly to demanding roles, and Lenore ranked among the toughest she ever undertook. The character grappled with rage, instability, and a failure to keep her child safe, and the storyline compelled families at home to reckon with painful truths that television of the 1970s scarcely confronted so plainly. What proved most vital was her refusal to flatten Lenore into a stock villain. She rendered her as a profoundly damaged woman molded by her circumstances, granting the series true emotional heft and pulling its storytelling far beyond mere comedy. Following Good Times, she assembled an impressive body of work, appearing in films such as Menace to Society and series like Living Single before stepping behind the camera to direct cherished sitcoms, including The Parkers and Girlfriends. She is also the mother of actresses Kim Fields and Alexis Fields, and her work guiding the next generation forms its own legacy. Now in her 70s, Chip Fields stands as a respected industry figure, proof that even the most unsettling stories merit honest telling, and that they tend to leave the most enduring mark. Ben Powers, Keith Anderson. As Good Times moved toward its conclusion, a new arrival injected welcome vitality into the Evans family. Keith Anderson, portrayed by Ben Powers, was more than a fresh face. He signaled growth and the next phase of life for Thelma Evans. Born in 1950 in New York City, Powers built his groundwork in music, comedy, and live performance, and his magnetism eventually carried him onto television. Coming aboard in the show's final season, Keith was introduced as Thelma's husband, a professional athlete marked by discipline and drive. Unlike the earlier figures defined so heavily by struggle, Keith stood for forward motion. Educated, focused, and brimming with hope, offering a window onto a future beyond the world the Evans family had always inhabited. His easy rapport with Bernadette Stanis lent the show a new texture, the two playing a young couple learning to weigh love against responsibility. And that thread left audiences with genuine optimism as the series wound down. After the show, Powers continued working through the 1980s, turning up in well-liked series such as Gimme a Break and The Greatest American Hero. Although he never attained the household recognition of certain castmates, his work stayed dependable and respected, and he favored a quieter existence centered on his craft rather than the spotlight. Tragically, his life ended too early. Ben Powers died in 2015 at the age of 64 from liver cancer. He may have entered the family late, but his contribution carried real meaning. Through Keith Anderson, he helped bring the Evans saga to a close on a note of possibility, reminding every viewer that fresh starts are always within reach, even after the hardest of times. Raymond Allen, Ned the Wino. In a series anchored in everyday hardship, even the slightest character could leave an enduring impression. And Ned the Wino proved it beyond doubt. Played by Raymond Allen, Ned never drove the plot, yet his presence gave the world of Good Times a grain and realism that made it feel authentically inhabited. Born in 1929, Allen assembled a dependable television career through the 1970s, prized for lending humor and humanity to roles others might have dismissed. Before and during Good Times, he surfaced in popular series like Sanford and Son and Starsky and Hutch, frequently playing people on society's edges, the very figures television tended to ignore. On the show, Ned was precisely what his name promised, a man wrestling with alcoholism, often drifting through the neighborhood. But what might have been a mocking or disposable part was handled with real gentleness. Allen gave Ned a fragility beneath the laughter, and his fleeting appearances softly reminded viewers that every community shelters people fighting invisible battles. His exchanges with the Evans family deepened the show's world, underscoring a quiet truth: that hardship takes countless shapes, and dignity can outlast them all. Away from the camera, Allen kept to a private life, married to Barbara Williams and raising 3 children together. As his health waned, he withdrew from acting, his last role arriving in the mid-1980s. Raymond Allen passed away in 2020 at the age of 91 from respiratory complications. He may never have ranked as a star, but his contribution lasts. Through Ned, he proved that even the smallest role, played from the heart, can lend genuine humanity to a story a whole generation still holds dear. 12 actors, one unforgettable family, and so many roads that led far beyond that little Chicago apartment. Some rose to global fame, Some chose quieter lives of purpose, and some left us far too soon. But it leaves us with a question worth talking about. Did fame truly lift these stars? Or did it cost them something the audience never saw? And do today's actors face the same pressures? Or has the industry really changed? There are no easy answers, only memories worth honoring. Tell me in the comments which story touched you the most and where you're watching from. And if these legends deserve to be remembered, subscribe to Hidden Celebrity Stories, where the people who shaped a generation are never forgotten.